She did not explain the date. Not to her mother who called every Sunday. Not to the coworker who noticed her staring at her wrist between night shifts. Not to the one person who should have been there that morning and chose not to be. A small tattoo shop in Baltimore. A Tuesday in November. Needle and ink and a man behind the counter. And Felicia Renee Thompson sat in the chair with a folded paper in her hand and 2 years of silence behind her teeth. The tattoo artist did not know what was about to happen when he asked. The shop was on the corner of 26th and Remington, between a laundromat that had not changed its sign in 15 years and a Dominican barber shop with a handwritten hours list taped to the glass. A Tuesday afternoon. November. The kind of cold that settles into a city and stays. The sign above the door said Ink and Anchor in hand-painted letters that had been touched up once and needed touching up again. Inside, the air smelled like rubbing alcohol and something faintly metallic, the particular scent of a place where needles meet skin on a regular basis. The walls were covered in flash sheets and frame designs arranged not by alphabet or category, but by something else entirely, some ordering system that only the person who hung them understood. A single chair in the center of the room. Good light. A counter with a register and a small framed card beside it that Felicia would not read until later. The buzzing of a needle came from somewhere in the back. Then it stopped. Gregory Sanders came through the doorway, wiping his hands on a cloth. Leather apron, black t-shirt underneath. Ink on his forearms in patterns she could not make out from the door. His hands were steady and square and calloused in the particular way of someone who worked with precision instruments for a living. He looked at her the way he looked at everyone who walked in. Quickly, completely, not judging, reading. She stood just inside the entrance with her coat still zipped and her purse held against her ribs like something she might need to protect. She looked at the chair. She looked at the door. She looked at the chair again. She had driven past this shop 4 times in the last 3 weeks. Twice she had slowed down. Once she had parked across the street and sat in her car for 11 minutes before pulling away. Today she had come inside. That was the difference between today and every other day. She had come inside. She sat down slowly. Not the way a person sits when they are comfortable, but the way a person sits when they have been standing for a very long time and have finally decided that the weight is not going to carry itself. She twisted the thin silver ring on her right hand. She did not take off her coat. Gregory set the cloth on the counter and pulled a stool to the side of the chair. He did not rush her. He did not fill the silence with questions about what she wanted or where she wanted it or how big. He simply sat down and waited. He had been doing this long enough to know the difference between someone who walked in ready and someone who walked in deciding. She was still deciding. Her eyes moved across the wall of designs and landed briefly on his left forearm. A name, Denise. Written not in any font she recognized, but in handwriting, actual handwriting. Slightly uneven. Slightly slanted to the right. The kind of penmanship that belongs to a specific person and no one else. She did not ask about it. She reached into her coat pocket and took out a folded piece of paper. Small, torn from a notebook. She unfolded it once and held it out without looking at him. He took it. 2 words in blue ink. March 14. He looked at the paper. He looked at her. She said nothing. She handed him the paper. 2 words. 1 date. No explanation. Felicia Renee Thompson grew up in West Baltimore in a row house on Fulton Avenue with a cracked front step her father kept meaning to fix and never did. Not because he was careless, because the list of things that needed fixing was always longer than the hours he had to fix them, and Harold Thompson was the kind of man who prioritized the work that paid over the work that waited. He was a plumber, not the kind with a company van and a website, the kind who carried his tools in the back of a pickup truck and got calls from people in the neighborhood who could not afford the company van kind. He fixed pipes and toilets and water heaters for families who paid him what they could when they could, and sometimes not at all. He never turned down a job. He smelled like copper and joint compound when he came home, and Felicia used to press her face into his jacket when he picked her up because the smell meant he was there. Harold died of lung cancer when Felicia was 16. Not suddenly, slowly, over the course of 8 months that felt like 8 years. He worked until the last 6 weeks because the bills did not stop arriving when the diagnosis did. Felicia's mother, Corinne, was a nurse at Johns Hopkins. Not a doctor, not an administrator. A floor nurse on the medical surgical unit for 30 years. The kind of nurse who remembered every patient's name and forgot to eat her own lunch. The kind who came home at the end of a 12-hour shift and still checked Felicia's homework before sitting down. Her white nursing shoes sat beside the front door every night, worn thin at the heels. The rubber soles compressed from 3 decades of walking. The same corridors under the same fluorescent lights, caring for other people's families. Before returning to her own. Felicia watched those shoes her entire childhood. She did not know she was learning something, but she was. She was learning that showing up was not a single decision. It was a decision you made again every morning before the sun came up, and again when your body told you to stop, and again when nobody noticed and nobody thanked you, and the work was still there the next day, exactly as heavy as it had been the day before. Corinne showed up. Harold had shown up. That was the household Felicia grew up in. 2 people who showed up until one of them could not anymore. After Harold died, Felicia enrolled in a CNA program at the community college. Not because she had a calling, because she had watched her mother and her mother's shoes, and she understood that caring for people was work that would always be needed, and she was not afraid of work that was needed. She got certified at 20. She got her first job at a nursing home in Pikesville at 21. She was not saving the world. She was changing sheets and taking vitals and helping elderly people get from their beds to the bathroom with dignity, which is its own kind of saving the world, the kind that never makes the news. She met Dwayne at a cookout in Druid Hill Park the summer she turned 22. He was funny. He was present. He paid attention to things. He noticed when she was tired. Before she said she was tired. And that noticing felt like something solid. She got pregnant. 4 months later, Dwayne stayed for 8 months after Caleb was born. He did not leave violently. He did not leave dramatically. He simply stopped showing up. The calls got shorter. The visits got less frequent. Then one morning she woke up and realized she had not heard from him in 11 days, and she was not surprised. That was the part that hurt most, not the leaving, the fact that she had already known he was going to. She was 22 years old and alone, and holding the most important document she would ever sign. Caleb James Thompson arrived on a Wednesday in October, 6 pounds 14 ounces, a small baby with large eyes and hands that gripped Felicia's finger within the first minute and did not let go. He did not cry much. He watched. He looked at things with a focus that seemed unusual for someone who had been alive for less than a week. By 2, he was drawing. Not well. Just marks on paper that meant something to him, if not to anyone else. By 4, the marks became pictures. Houses mostly. He drew houses on everything. The back of grocery receipts. The margins of his mother's work schedule. The blank side of the electric bill envelope. Always houses. Always with the door open. Felicia asked him once why the door was always open. He looked at her with the expression of a child who has been asked a question so obvious that the asking itself is confusing. So people can come in, he said. By 7, he was the kind of boy who asked questions the way some people breathe. Constantly, and without apparent effort. He asked why the sky changed color at the end of the day. He asked why some buildings were tall and some were short. He asked why dogs could not talk, and whether they would if they could, and what they would say. He asked why his mother cried in the bathroom sometimes when she thought he was asleep. That was the thing about Caleb. He noticed everything. The same way Felicia had noticed Corinne's shoes by the door. Caleb noticed his mother's weight. Not the physical kind. The kind she carried in her shoulders and her silence, and the way she sometimes stood at the kitchen sink, looking out the window at nothing in particular for longer than made sense. He did not say anything about it. He was 7. He did not have the words, but he had a gesture that was worth more than any word he could have found. When Felicia was tired, when the day had taken more from her than she had to give, Caleb would walk up beside her and put his hand on her shoulder. Just his hand. Just resting there. No words. No questions. Just the quiet pressure of a small palm on the place where her neck met her shoulder, staying there until she reached up and covered his hand with hers. He had no way of knowing this. But that gesture was the only thing in Felicia's day that was not a demand. Everything else asked her for something. The patients needed care. The bills needed payment. Iris needed feeding and changing and holding. The apartment needed cleaning. The schedule needed managing. Caleb's hand on her shoulder was the one moment in any given day that gave without asking. He was 7 years old, and he had already figured out something that most adults never learn: that sometimes the most important thing you can offer another person is not a solution. It is your hand on their shoulder and your silence beside them and nothing else. Iris was 3.5 when Caleb died. She is 5 now. She does not remember much of him. She remembers a feeling more than a face, a presence at the edge of her earliest memories that she cannot quite name. She asks about him sometimes, not often, but on certain days she will look at Felicia and say, "Where did Caleb go?" Felicia has never found an answer to that question that does not break something inside her. She has tried the ones they suggest. He is in heaven. He is watching over you. None of them answer the actual question a 5-year-old is asking, which is not theological. It is spatial. She wants to know where he went. In Felicia's wallet, folded into a square, no bigger than a postage stamp, is the last picture Caleb ever drew. She has not unfolded it in 2 years. She does not need to. She knows what is on it. A house. A door. Open. Caleb drew pictures of houses. He always drew the door open. The morning of March 14th began the way most mornings did. Early, dark. The alarm at 4:45. Felicia had been on shift since 11 the night before. Double shift. A co-worker had called in sick, and the nursing home was short-staffed, which it almost always was. She had called Opal the evening before. Opal lived 2 doors down on Fulton, 71 years old, retired school bus driver. The kind of woman who kept her porch light on and treated every child on the block like a shared responsibility no one had assigned her. Opal walked Caleb to school every morning. Felicia worked nights, every single morning. It was not a formal arrangement. It was the kind of thing that exists in neighborhoods where people cannot afford the formal kind, so they build the informal kind out of trust and proximity. Opal called at 6:15 that morning. Felicia was changing the sheets on bed 7 in the east wing of the facility. She almost did not hear the phone. Opal's voice was hoarse, a cold, the kind that comes on fast and sits on the chest. She was not going to be able to walk Caleb today. Felicia stood in the hallway with the phone against her ear and did the math she always did. The math of a single mother with no margin for anything to go wrong. Iris was at Corinne's. Caleb was asleep at home. The school was 6 blocks away. He knew every crossing. He knew to look both ways. He was 7. The intersection at Lafayette and Monroe did not have a crosswalk. It did not have a pedestrian signal. It had a stop sign on one side and nothing on the other. The city had been petitioned 3 times to install a traffic light at that corner. 3 times the request had been deferred. Budget allocation, priority scheduling. The language that means someone decided this corner did not matter enough yet. It mattered. Caleb left the house at 7:20. He locked the door with the key. Felicia kept on a lanyard around his neck because he was responsible enough to carry it, and she needed him to be. He put his backpack over both shoulders. He walked down the front steps. The morning was cold but clear. March in Baltimore. The kind of morning that looks like it might become something warmer later, but has not decided yet. He walked 6 blocks. He looked both ways. The car was doing 43 in a 25 zone. Caleb was in the crosswalk that did not exist on a corner the city had not prioritized at 7:32 on a Wednesday morning in March. Felicia was changing the sheet on bed 7. She was tucking the corner under the mattress with the efficient fold she had done 10,000 times. The patient in bed 7 was an 84-year-old woman named Dorothy who liked to hold Felicia's hand for a moment each morning before the day began. Felicia tucked the corner. Dorothy reached for her hand. Felicia took it. At 7:51 her phone rang. She was still holding Dorothy's hand. She let go. She answered. She did not speak for a long time after the voice on the other end finished speaking. She set the phone on the edge of the bed. The sheet had fallen on the floor. She did not pick it up. She stood very still. The kind of still that is not calm. The kind that happens when the body receives information the mind has not yet agreed to process. She did not scream. She did not collapse. Dorothy looked up at her from the bed with the expression of someone who has lived long enough to recognize what a face looks like when the world behind it has just changed permanently. Felicia walked to the door. She did not remember walking. Her legs moved because legs move. Caleb died at 11:18 that morning. 4 hours. He held on for 4 hours. She was not there when he left the house. She was not there when he crossed the street. She was there when he left. She held his hand. His hand was small. It was warm. Then it was not. March 14th. She had not needed to write it down. The body remembers. Dates the mind wishes it could forget. 2 years is not a straight line. People talk about grief like it is a road, like it has a direction, like you start at the worst place, and you walk, and eventually you arrive somewhere better. That is not what happened to Felicia. What happened was something closer to weather. Days that were survivable and days that were not, and no way to predict which kind was coming when she opened her eyes in the morning. She went back to work 3 weeks after the funeral. Not because she was ready, because the rent did not pause for grief, and Iris still needed diapers, and Felicia Thompson was still the kind of person who showed up. She changed sheets. She took vitals. She drove home at 7:15. She picked up Iris from Corinne's. She sat at the kitchen table and stared at the chair where Caleb used to sit and fold napkins into paper airplanes, and she did not move for a very long time. She had learned to function without functioning, to move through rooms without arriving in them, to answer questions with the right words while the actual answer stayed locked somewhere behind her ribs where no one could reach it. The guilt was the thing that did not leave. Everything else came and went. The sadness came in waves. The anger came and passed. Even the specific physical ache of reaching for someone who is not there had days where it softened. But the guilt was constant. It lived in her like a second heartbeat. If she had not taken the double shift, if she had said no, if she had been home that morning, if she had walked him herself, guilt is not logical. It does not respond to evidence or reason, or the well-meaning people who say you could not have known. It responds to one thing only: proximity. She had not been close enough. That was the only evidence it needed. And then there was Iris. Felicia loved Iris with everything she had. But sometimes she would be sitting on the floor playing with Iris, and Iris would tilt her head a certain way or laugh a certain way, and for a half second, Felicia would see Caleb, not Iris, Caleb, the shape of his face in hers, the echo of a boy in the girl who was still here. And the guilt of that, the guilt of looking at the child who lived and seeing the child who did not, was a second layer she could not explain to anyone, because it sounded like something a terrible mother would feel. She was not a terrible mother. She was a mother carrying 2 children, one in her arms and one in her chest. She did not talk about it, not to Corinne, not to the grief counselor the hospital had referred her to, and she had seen twice before the copays became something she could not justify, not to anyone. For 2 years, March 14th lived inside her, and she carried it the way you carry something that has no place to go, in silence, underneath, until one night at 2 in the morning. Between bed checks on the East Wing, she took out her phone and typed tattoo shops near me. She scrolled past 14. She stopped at one called Ink and Anchor. The name made sense to her in a way she did not examine. She was not looking to move on. She was looking to move the date from inside her chest to the surface of her skin. She was tired of carrying it where no one could see. Gregory Sanders had been reading people longer than he had been tattooing them. That was the thing most clients did not understand about him. They thought the skill was in his hands. It was not. The skill was in the 3 seconds before his hands did anything. The 3 seconds where he looked at the person in his chair and understood what they had come for without asking. Some people came for decoration. Some came for rebellion. Some came for meaning. And some came carrying something so heavy that the tattoo was not art. It was a place to set it down. He could tell the difference in the way a person sat down. The decoration people sat quickly. The meaning people sat slowly. The ones carrying weight sat the way you sit when you are not sure the chair will hold what you are bringing to it. Gregory built Ink and Anchor with his own hands. Not a metaphor. He built it. He sanded the floors himself on his knees over 2 weekends in August. He painted the walls a flat gray that he chose because it did not compete with the work on the skin. He built the shelves from reclaimed wood he found behind a demolished row house in Pigtown. He reupholstered the chair himself twice because the first fabric wore through in under a year, and he refused to put a client in a chair that looked like it had given up. The sign outside was hand-lettered, not because he could not afford a printed one, because a hand-lettered sign tells you something about the person inside. It tells you that someone cared enough to do it slowly. The flash sheets on the walls were organized in an order that no one else understood. Not alphabetical, not by style, by emotional weight. The lightest work near the door, the heaviest near the back, closest to where he sat when he was alone. He had arranged them this way without deciding to, the same way he had arranged most of his life. By feel, by instinct, by the particular intelligence of someone who had spent his childhood learning to read the emotional temperature of a room before the room knew he was reading it. That skill did not come from art school. Gregory had never been to art school. It came from foster care, from learning at 6 years old, which adults were safe and which were not based on nothing more than the sound of a footstep in a hallway or the specific silence that meant someone in the house was angry. He had learned to read people the way you learn to read weather, not analytically, as a felt sense. Automatic and accurate and developed under conditions where getting it wrong had consequences. He had a small radio on the counter that he played for most clients. Jazz. Low. Not loud enough to fill the room, but loud enough to give nervous people something to listen to that was not the sound of the needle. But some clients did not need the radio. Some clients needed the quiet. He could tell which kind within the first 30 seconds. The ones who needed quiet came in with a stillness about them that had nothing to do with calm. It had to do with capacity. They were already full. Sound would be one thing too many. For those clients, he turned the radio off without saying why. On his left forearm in handwriting that was not a font, the name Denise. He did not explain it to clients. Most did not ask. The ones who asked received a pause and a sentence that was true but not complete. She was someone important. That was all he said. The handwriting was real. It was specific. It belonged to one person and no one else. He had one rule he never explained to anyone. He did not tattoo dates without asking what they meant, because in his experience, a date on the body was never just a number. It was always the door to something a person had not fully opened yet. Denise Sanders was not a bad mother. She was a mother whose pain arrived before her son did and never left. She had grown up in Park Heights, the youngest of 4, a household that was loud when it was good and quiet when it was not, and it was quiet more often than anyone in the family ever admitted later. She started using at 19. Not because she was reckless, because she was in pain, and someone offered her something that made the pain stop, and nobody had ever offered her anything else that worked as well. That was the thing about addiction that most people who have never experienced it do not understand. It is not a failure of willpower. It is the body finding the only solution it has been given, and holding on to it because nothing better has arrived. Gregory was born when Denise was 22. There were good days, more than people might expect. On the good days, she cooked. She sang along to the radio in the kitchen. She sat on the floor with Gregory and drew pictures with him using the same crayons he would later use to discover that his hands could make something worth looking at. On his 6th birthday, she gave him a card. Not a store-bought card, a folded piece of paper with his name on the front in her handwriting. The letters slightly uneven, slightly shaky. The pen had hesitated in places where her hand was not steady. Inside, she had written 5 words. You are my best thing. He did not understand at the time why she had looked at him for so long after he read it. He understands now. She was memorizing. She knew something he did not know yet. She knew the good days were running out. She died on a Tuesday. He was at school. A neighbor came to pick him up because Denise had not come, and the school called the emergency number, and the emergency number was a woman named Patricia who lived downstairs. Patricia walked him home, and there were people outside the building, and an ambulance with its lights still on, but no siren, and Gregory knew, before Patricia told him, because he had already learned to read rooms, and this room had a shape he recognized. In the United States, more than 400,000 children are in the foster care system at any given time. Roughly 20,000 age out each year, which means they turn 18, and the system simply ends. No family. No safety net. No one waiting at the door. Gregory entered the system at 6. He moved through 4 families in 12 years. The first family was kind but temporary. The second was temporary but not kind. The third was both. The fourth was neither. None of them were cruel. That is important to say. He was not beaten. He was not starved. He was simply not kept. There is a particular kind of damage that comes not from being harmed, but from being temporary in every room you enter. From learning that the word home is conditional, that it has an expiration date attached to it that no one tells you until the social worker arrives with the paperwork. He was housed and fed and moved from room to room and school to school, and by the time he was 14, he had stopped unpacking his bag completely because the effort of putting things in drawers only to take them out again had become a kind of cruelty all its own. The birthday card traveled with him. Through every home, every room, every bag he packed and unpacked and packed again. It was folded now in a way that had worn the crease nearly through. The ink had faded, the paper had softened at the edges, but the words were still there. "You are my best thing." He kept it the way Felicia kept the drawing in her wallet. Not as sentimentality, as proof. Proof that he had been loved, that it had existed, that the good days were real, even if they did not last. At 18, Gregory Darnell Sanders walked out of the system with a backpack, a birthday card, with fading ink, and the handwriting of a woman who had loved him in the only way her body allowed her to. He found drawing the way most people find the thing that saves them. By accident. In the 3rd foster home, the father, a man named Curtis, who worked at the port and did not talk much but was not unkind, kept a tin of colored pencils in a kitchen drawer. They were old. Some of them barely had lead left. Gregory found them one afternoon when he was looking for a pen to do homework and sat down at the kitchen table and drew on the back of an electric bill because there was no other paper. He drew a building. Not well, but the lines were his. That was the thing. In a life where nothing belonged to him, not the bed, not the room, not the address, the lines on that paper were something he had made. Curtis looked at the drawing that evening and did not say anything for a moment. Then he opened the drawer and put the entire tin of pencils on the table in front of Gregory and said, "You can keep those." 3 words. They were enough. Gregory drew on everything after that. Envelopes, paper bags, the back of church programs. By 15, he was drawing on skin, not tattoos. Ink drawings on his own forearm that washed off in the shower, but lasted long enough for him to see what a picture looked like on a body instead of a page. At 18, he walked out of the system and into a city that had no particular plan for him. He worked at a warehouse. He worked at a gas station. He slept in a room he rented by the week above a liquor store on North Avenue. He kept drawing. He found Hank through a flyer taped to the window of a convenience store on Pigtown's main block. Hank ran a tattoo shop the size of a bathroom and had been tattooing for 31 years. He needed someone to sweep floors and clean equipment. Gregory showed up the next morning. He swept floors. He watched Hank work. He cleaned needles and organized ink and said very little and watched everything. Hank noticed. After 3 months, he let Gregory practice on pigskin. After 6 months, he let him observe a client session. After a year, he handed him the machine and said, "Show me what you learned." Hank taught him one thing that stayed longer than any technique. A tattoo is the only art form where the canvas tells you what it needs. You do not decide for them. You listen. Gregory listened. He got his first client at 23, a woman who wanted her daughter's initials on her collarbone. His hands were steady. His lines were clean. He opened Ink and Anchor at 27 with money he had saved over 4 years of working in other people's shops. The name was deliberate. Ink because it was how he lived. Anchor because it was what he had never had until he built one for himself. He tattooed Denise on his own forearm using a mirror and a steady hand, and the birthday card propped open on the counter beside him. Not a font. Her handwriting. The exact slope of her letters. The exact hesitation where the pen had paused. He wanted her handwriting on his skin because he did not have her hand. 7 years later, on a Tuesday afternoon in November, a woman walked into his shop and handed him a piece of paper with a date on it. He looked at the date. He looked at her. He knew before she said a word that this was not a fashion tattoo. Gregory set the paper on the counter beside the machine and did not look at it again. He already knew what it said. He had read it once, and that was enough. He opened a fresh needle. He tore the sterile packaging slowly the way he always did, giving the client time to hear the process before they felt it. The snap of the wrapper, the click of the needle locking into the machine, the quiet hiss of the autoclave finishing its cycle in the back room. He wiped the inside of her left wrist with alcohol. The cotton pad was cold. She flinched, not from pain, from being touched. He noticed that. He noticed everything. The way she had held the paper out without looking at him, like eye contact, would cost her something she could not afford. The way she had not taken off her coat as if she might still need to leave quickly. The way her breathing had changed when she sat down, getting slower and more deliberate. The breathing of someone who is managing themselves from the inside. He had seen this before. Not often, but enough. The decoration clients breathed normally. The rebellion clients breathed fast. The grief clients breathed the way Felicia was breathing now. Controlled, measured, like they were rationing air. He turned off the radio. He did not explain why. He simply reached over and pressed the button, and the jazz that had been playing low in the background disappeared, and the room became the kind of quiet that has texture to it. The hum of the overhead light, the faint vibration of a truck passing outside, the sound of his own stool shifting as he positioned himself beside the chair. He had learned this from Hank. Some people need the noise. Some people are already so full of noise that adding more is the last thing their body can hold. This woman was full. He could see it in the way her jaw was set, not clenched, held. The way you hold something in place when you are afraid that if you let go of the tension, the whole structure behind it might shift. He transferred the stencil to her wrist. March 14. Clean lines. Simple font. The purple outline appeared on her skin like a bruise that had been waiting to become visible. She looked at it for the first time. The date that had lived inside her for 2 years, sitting on the surface of her body where anyone could see it. She did not say anything. She just looked. The way you look at something you have been carrying in the dark when it is finally brought into the light. Not with relief, exactly, with recognition. Gregory loaded the ink. Black. He tested the machine once, a short buzz that lasted less than a second, the sound of the needle moving through air before it met skin. He looked at the stencil. He looked at her face. He had asked this question 1,000 times. It was the question that separated ink from meaning. It was the rule he kept because Hank had kept it, and Hank had been right. A date on the body is never just a number. It is always the door to something. He was about to ask it one more time. But this time, he paused. 1 second, maybe 2, because he had read her face the way he had been reading faces since he was 6 years old, and what he saw there was not uncertainty. It was not regret. It was the specific weight of a person sitting in front of something they have been circling for a very long time and have finally decided to walk into. He knew that weight. He carried his own version of it on his left forearm. He looked at the date. He looked at her. "Can I ask you something?" She knew the question before he finished it. She had known it was coming the way you know a wave is coming when you are standing in the water. You feel it in your body before you see it with your eyes. What does the date mean? 4 words. She had imagined this moment. She had rehearsed it. Sitting in her car outside the shop 3 weeks ago. Lying in bed at 2 a.m. between shifts. Standing at the kitchen sink while Iris slept in the next room. She had practiced the sentence the way you practice something that should be simple but is not. "It is the day my son died." 7 words. She had said them in her head so many times they had become almost abstract, a sequence of sounds with the meaning worn down by repetition, the way a stone gets smooth in a river. She thought she was ready. She opened her mouth. "It is the day my." She stopped, not because she chose to, not because she changed her mind, because the body has a door. A door it closes when the thing behind it is too large to pass through safely. She had said those words 1,000 times in her own head, but she had never said them out loud, not to a coworker, not to her mother, not to the grief counselor she saw twice, not to anyone. For 2 years the sentence had lived inside her mouth like something she was holding between her teeth, carrying it carefully, never biting down, never letting it fall. And now she was in a chair in a tattoo shop on a Tuesday in November, and a man she did not know had asked her a question, and the answer was right there, right at the front of her throat, and her body would not let it go. She sat very still. Her eyes did not fill with tears. They did something worse. They went flat. They fixed on a point in the middle distance somewhere between his face and the wall behind him, and they stopped moving entirely. The way eyes stop when the person behind them has gone somewhere else, somewhere inside, somewhere the room cannot follow. The shop was quiet. The overhead light hummed. A car passed on 26th Street. She could hear her own breathing. She could hear the specific quality of silence that happens when two people are in a small room and one of them has just failed to say the hardest sentence of their life, and the other one is waiting without pressing. She worked with dying people every night. She knew the language of death. She could document a passing with clinical precision. She could write the time and the vitals and the cause in neat handwriting on a chart. She had done it dozens of times. She knew how to talk about death the way a carpenter knows how to talk about wood, by profession, by practice. But the death of her own child was not a profession. It was not a chart. It was not a word she could write neatly on a line. It was the thing behind the door that her body had closed, and she could feel it pressing against the other side, and she could not make herself open it. Not here, not yet, maybe not ever. She had spent 2 years learning to talk around the sentence, learning to answer, "How are you with fine?" and "How is the family with good?" and to smile at the right moments and to change the subject before anyone got close enough to ask the question that required the answer she could not say. She had built an entire architecture of avoidance, and now in a tattoo shop on 26th Street, the architecture had failed. The sentence hung in the air, unfinished. "It is the day my..." Gregory did not move. He did not speak. He held the machine in his right hand, and he sat on his stool, and he looked at her, and he waited. Not the kind of waiting that expects something, the kind that allows it. 5 seconds passed. They felt longer. Gregory looked at the unfinished sentence hanging in the space between them, and he understood it completely. Not the details. He did not know whose day it was or what had happened on it. He understood the shape of it, the weight. The specific silence of a person whose mouth has opened and whose body has said no. He knew that silence. He had lived inside it. He had been 23 years old and sitting in Hank's chair, and Hank had asked him who Denise was, and Gregory had opened his mouth, and nothing had come out. Not a word, not a sound. Just the empty space where an answer should have been, and was not because the answer was too big for the door. Hank had looked at him for a moment. Not with pity, not with curiosity, with the steady, unhurried attention of a man who had been tattooing for 31 years and had learned that some questions are not asked to be answered. They are asked to be heard, and sometimes the hearing is enough. Then Hank said, "Okay." Just that, "Okay." And he picked up the machine, and he started working. He did not ask again. He did not need to. He understood that the name on Gregory's arm was not a question to be answered. It was a weight to be respected, and the respect was in the not asking. Gregory had carried that moment for 11 years. He had carried it the way Felicia carried the drawing in her wallet, not as a memory, as a template. A way of being in a room with another person's pain without trying to own it or fix it or make it into something more manageable than it was. Hank had given him that. Not in a lesson, in a sentence, in one word, "Okay." And now Gregory was sitting in his own chair, in his own shop, and a woman he did not know had just failed to say the hardest sentence of her life, and the question was what he was going to do with the silence she had given him instead. Gregory looked at Felicia. Her eyes were still fixed on that point in the middle distance. Her hands were still in her lap. The sentence was still unfinished. He set the machine down gently on the tray beside him. He did not reach for her. He did not lean forward. He did not say, "I am sorry." He did not say, "It is going to be okay." He did not say any of the things that people say when they are trying to help, but are really trying to make the discomfort smaller for themselves. He said 5 words. "You do not have to finish." She looked at him. Something shifted. Not in her face exactly. Behind it. The way a room changes when someone opens a window you did not know was there. Not a flood of air, just a breath. Just the faintest movement of something that had been sealed. He picked the machine back up. He positioned his hand over her wrist. He did not ask again. There are 2 kinds of silence. The kind that is empty. and the kind that is holding something. Gregory's silence was the second kind. It was not the absence of words. It was the presence of understanding so complete that words would have made it smaller. The needle touched her wrist. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in 2 years, the silence did not feel like something she was trapped inside. It felt like something she was being held by. The pain was small, smaller than she expected. A sharp, thin line of heat moving across the inside of her wrist in short, precise strokes. The needle entering the skin and depositing ink just below the surface in the dermis, where the body would hold it permanently. She had read about the process. She knew the science. But knowing the science and feeling the needle are two different kinds of knowing. And the second kind does not require the first. The pain had a rhythm to it. Gregory worked in short bursts, 3 or 4 seconds of contact, then a pause to wipe the excess ink, then another pass. She could feel the pattern. Buzz, wipe, buzz, wipe. It was steady. It was predictable. And after 2 years of carrying a pain that had no rhythm, no pattern, no beginning or end, there was something in the regularity of the needle that her body recognized as bearable. This pain had a shape. It had edges. It would end. That was the difference. The pain in her chest had no edges. It went in every direction at once, and it never announced when it was going to arrive, and it never told her when it planned to leave. But the needle was honest. The needle said, I am here and I will be here for this long and then I will stop. She could work with that. Somewhere around the second letter, she started talking. She did not decide to. It happened the way things happen when the conditions allow them. The silence was safe. Gregory was not looking at her face. He was looking at her wrist. His attention was on the ink and the line and the angle of the needle, and she understood, without thinking about it, that his eyes being somewhere else was what freed her mouth. He was not watching her feel things. He was working, and the working gave her room. He drew, she said. Not a story. Not in order. Just pieces. He used to fold napkins into airplanes. Every dinner. The paper kind you throw across the room. He would try to land them on the counter by the stove, and he almost never did, but he kept trying. A pause. She listened to the needle. His favorite color was orange, not bright orange. The orange of the sky right before it gets dark. That one. He would point at it from the window and say, Mama, look. And she would look, even though she had seen it 1,000 times, because he had never seen it 1,000 times. Every time was the first time for him. Gregory did not look up. Yeah, he said. Tell me, she told him, about the questions, about the hand on her shoulder, about the way he drew houses with the door always open. She told him about a boy who noticed when his mother was tired, and who did not have the words for it yet, but had found a gesture that was better than any word. She told these things to the top of Gregory's head while he worked, and he received them the way he received the ink into the gun, carefully, precisely, without rushing, without reacting, just taking them in and holding them in the same steady hands that were pressing a date into her skin. She told him about the paper airplanes Caleb made from dinner napkins, how he folded them with a seriousness that made her laugh, how he aimed for the counter by the stove every single time, and almost never landed one but kept throwing them anyway, how the kitchen floor was always covered in crumpled napkins by the end of dinner, and she pretended to be annoyed but was not. Gregory's hand paused for a fraction of a second. So briefly she did not notice, but his hand knew something his face did not show. He did not plan to show her. That was the thing about it. He did not make a decision. He was wiping the excess ink from the first pass of the M in March, and she had gone quiet again after the napkins and the houses and the hand on her shoulder, and the quiet had settled back into the room, like something returning to its pause. Natural state, and without thinking about it, he turned his left, forearm over, so that the inside was facing up. He did not hold it out. He did not point to it. He simply let it be visible. The name, Denise, in handwriting that did not belong to any font, in letters that leaned slightly to the right, with the specific unsteadiness of a hand that had once been shaking but had pressed on anyway. Felicia looked at it. She had noticed it when she first walked in. She had not asked. She looked at it now, and she saw what she had not seen from across the room, that it was not a design. It was a reproduction. Someone's actual handwriting, transferred onto skin, with the kind of care that only makes sense when the original is the only copy that exists. She was my mother. His voice was the same as it had been all afternoon. Level, unhurried, like he was stating a fact that had been true for a long time and did not need any particular decoration. She died when I was 6. This is her handwriting, from a birthday card she wrote me. He paused. The only one I have. There are conversations that change things. Not because of what is said, because of what is understood without needing to be said. Felicia did not respond immediately. She looked at the name on his arm, and she saw the letters and the way they trembled slightly at the curves, and she understood something that required no explanation. He had taken the only physical evidence of his mother's love, a few words on a piece of paper, and he had made them permanent on his body because the paper would eventually disintegrate, but the skin would hold. She understood this because she was sitting in a chair doing the same thing, taking something she had been carrying inside and pressing it into her skin so that it could exist somewhere visible, so that she did not have to explain it every time. It would just be there, part of her, the way Denise was part of him. Gregory had lost his mother at 6, too young to remember most of it. Felicia had lost her son at 7, old enough to remember everything. They were standing at opposite ends of the same hallway. Different doors, same darkness on the other side. You kept her. Felicia's voice was quiet, not a question, a recognition, on my arm, every day. She looked down at her own wrist. The outline of March 14 was taking shape under the ink and the passes of the needle. The skin was red and slightly swollen around the letters. The date that had been inside her for 2 years was becoming external, visible. Hers in a different way now. Not just something she carried, something she wore. I am keeping him. She did not say it loudly. She said it the way you say something you have just realized is true. The room held both of them for a moment. The name on his arm. The date on her wrist. 2 people who had each turned their body into a place to hold what they could not put down. Neither of them spoke for a while after that. The silence was not empty. It was full in the way that only certain silences can be. The kind that happens when 2 people have shown each other something real, and the showing has used up whatever need either of them had to speak. Gregory picked up the machine. The buzz resumed. He went back to the numbers. She went back to the quiet. But the room was different now. The space between the chair and the stool had changed. Not smaller, not warmer, just honest. Gregory wiped the last of the excess ink from the final digit. He leaned back. He looked at the work. March 14. Black ink on brown skin. The numbers clean, and even, and permanent. The veins of her inner wrist, visible just beneath the letters, blue-green under the surface. The body's own lines running alongside the ones he had just placed there. He set the machine down. He picked up a clean cloth and wiped the area one final time, gently. The way you handle something that belongs to someone else and matters more than they have told you. Felicia looked at her wrist. She did not say anything for a long time. She just looked. The way you look at something that has always existed inside you when it finally appears on the outside. The date was there, on her skin, where it could be seen by anyone who got close enough to read it. Not hidden, not buried, not locked behind her teeth, or carried in the silence between shifts. It was on her skin the way Denise was on Gregory's skin. Permanent, chosen. A deliberate act of remembering in a world that keeps asking people to move on. She cried. Not the way she had expected to if she ever let herself. Not loudly, not in waves. Just 2 tears that fell without permission, the kind that happen when the body finally releases something it has been holding, past the point where holding makes any sense. The kind that are not about sadness exactly. They are about the relief of something finally being where it belongs. Gregory did not acknowledge the tears. He reached for the aftercare bandage and began to apply it over the fresh ink with the precise practiced movements of a man who had done this thousands of times. He spoke in the same voice he used for every client. Keep it clean. Wash it twice a day with unscented soap. Pat dry. Do not scratch it when it starts to peel. Apply a thin layer of the ointment I will give you for the first week. Keep it out of direct sunlight until it heals. She listened. She listened to a man give her instructions for caring for something on her own body, and she realized as he was speaking that this was the first time in 2 years that anyone had told her how to take care of herself. Not a suggestion from a well-meaning relative. Not a pamphlet from the grief counselor's office. Just clear, direct, practical instructions from a person who had just placed something on her body and wanted it to heal properly. She spent every night caring for other people's bodies, changing their sheets, checking their vitals, holding their hands in the dark hours when the loneliness of a medical facility becomes something physical. Nobody told her how to care for her own skin. Nobody checked her vitals. Nobody held her hand. She nodded. She wiped her face with the back of her free hand. March 14, on her wrist, permanent. Not because she might forget, because she wanted the world to know she was carrying it. She rolled down her sleeve. She stood up. She reached for her wallet. Gregory shook his head. Not dramatically, just a small movement, the kind that stops a person mid-gesture. She held the wallet in her hand and looked at him. How much? This one is mine. She did not understand at first. What she understood was money. She understood transactions. She understood that things cost what they cost, and you paid for them because that was how the world worked, and she had been paying for things on her own for a long time, and she was not the kind of person who accepted favors, because favors came with weight, and she was already carrying enough. I want to pay for it. I know you do, but this one is mine. Not because I feel sorry for you, because this is the kind of work I opened this shop to do. She looked at him for a moment. She was reading him, the way she had learned to read people over 2 years of assessing who meant what they said and who was performing something. What she read in his face was not pity, it was not charity. It was the expression of a man who had just done something that mattered to him and did not need to be compensated for it because the doing had been the compensation. She put her wallet back in her coat pocket. She zipped the coat. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the handle and turned back. She must have loved you very much, Denise. Gregory looked at her from across the room. She loved me in the only way she could. A pause. The kind that holds something too specific for language. That is enough. Yeah, it is. She opened the door. The cold came in immediately. November in Baltimore. Late afternoon. The streetlights were beginning to turn on the early ones, the ones that sense the darkness before the sky fully commits to it. She stepped out onto the sidewalk. She pulled her coat tighter. The air hit her face with the flat, expressionless cold that Baltimore gets in November when the wind comes off the harbor and has nothing personal against you but does not care either. She started walking toward the bus stop on 26th. She did not look at her phone. She did not check the time. She looked at her wrist. The bandage covered the tattoo, but she could feel it underneath. The slight heat of new ink in irritated skin. The particular ache of something that had been placed where it had not been before. She thought about the last 2 years. About the silence she had been living inside. About the sentence she had not been able to finish. About a man who had said, "You do not have to finish," and then picked up a needle and kept working. She thought about what had changed. It was not the tattoo. The tattoo was ink. What had changed was simpler than that and harder to name. For the first time in 2 years, she had opened her mouth in front of a stranger, and the stranger had not asked her to explain more than her body was willing to give. He had not needed the whole sentence. He had not needed the story. He had just needed her to be in the chair. And she had been in the chair. And that had been enough. She caught the 4:15 bus. She sat in the back. She did not look at her phone. She looked at her wrist. The date looked different from the outside. Gregory cleaned the needle. He wiped the chair. He put the ink away and organized the tray the way he organized it after every session with the precision of someone who believed that the condition of your tools was a reflection of the condition of your attention. He did not turn the radio back on. The shop was quiet in the way it had been quiet all afternoon, but now the quiet belonged to him alone. He stood at the counter and looked at his left forearm. Denise. 28 years of carrying that name. The ink had needed touching up twice over the years. The lines were not as sharp as they had been when Hank first laid them down, but the handwriting was still there. The specific slope of her letters. The way the D leaned forward slightly like it was reaching for the next letter before the hand had arrived. He had memorized every curve. He could close his eyes and trace it from memory. He thought about Hank. About the afternoon in Pigtown, when Gregory had sat in the chair, and Hank had asked who Denise was, and Gregory had opened his mouth, and nothing had come out. And Hank had said, "Okay," and started working. He thought about what Hank had told him years later, when Gregory was already tattooing on his own, and had asked Hank why he never pressed clients for the stories behind their ink. Hank had looked at him the way Hank looked at everything, directly, without hurry, and he said, "You do not fix people with a needle. You give them a place to put the thing they have been holding." That was it. That was the whole philosophy of the craft, in 2 sentences. Felicia had been holding a date for 2 years. He had given her a place to put it. That was the work. That was the reason the shop existed. Not the flash sheets on the wall. Not the walk-ins who wanted butterflies and quotes. This. He opened the drawer beside the register. The birthday card was there, folded along the same crease that had been there for 28 years. The paper soft at the edges, the ink fading. He opened it and read the 5 words he already knew by memory. "You are my best thing." He thought about Felicia, about the sentence she could not finish, about the way she had looked at his arm and said, "You kept her," about the way she had looked at her own wrist and said, "I am keeping him," about the moment at the door when she told him, "That is enough," and he had agreed, because she was right. It was enough. It had always been enough. He put the card back in the drawer. He turned off the light. He locked the door. Outside Baltimore was doing what it always did in November, getting darker earlier, holding its cold close. 3 weeks later, the bell above the door rang, and Gregory looked up from the counter and saw her. Felicia, different this time, not in the way she looked, but something in the way she stood in the doorway had changed. She was not looking at the door behind her. She was looking at him. And she was not alone. A girl stood beside her, 5 years old, pink backpack, one hand holding her mother's hand, the other hand holding the strap of the backpack like she had been told to keep track of it and was taking the instructions seriously. "I want to show her," Felicia said, "so she knows." Gregory nodded. He did not ask what she meant. Felicia knelt down beside Iris. She rolled up her left sleeve. The tattoo had healed. The ink had settled into her skin the way it does after a few weeks, the lines slightly softer than they had been when they were fresh, the black becoming part of the brown, the date no longer sitting on the surface, but sinking into it, becoming her. Iris looked at it. She tilted her head the way children do when they are studying something. Is that Caleb's day? Not a question exactly, more like a confirmation, like she already knew and just needed to hear the answer. Yes, baby. Iris reached out with one small finger and touched the date on her mother's wrist. She traced the numbers slowly, the 1, the 4. She did not say anything while she touched it. She just looked at the ink the way she might look at a photograph, something that holds a person who is not there anymore. Gregory stood behind the counter. He did not move. He watched the girl's finger on the date, and he thought about Denise. He thought about what it would have meant if at 5 years old someone had knelt down beside him and shown him where his mother's name was kept. If someone had given him permission to touch the place where love had been made permanent. He did not have that. Felicia was giving Iris what he had never had, a chance to share the weight instead of carrying it alone. Iris let go of her mother's wrist. She reached behind her and unzipped the backpack the rest of the way and took out a piece of paper. Folded once, she held it out to Gregory with both hands, the way a child holds something that matters to them, carefully, with the seriousness of someone who does not yet know how to be casual about the things they care about. He took it. He unfolded it. A drawing. Crayon on white paper. A house. Simple. The kind of house every child draws. A square. A triangle roof. 2 windows. And a door. Open. Caleb used to draw houses, Iris said. Her voice was clear and unhesitant, the way only a 5-year-old's voice can be. I drew one too. Felicia did not speak. She pulled Iris into her and held her. Gregory looked at the drawing. The open door. He looked up at the front of his shop. The hand-lettered sign. Ink and anchor. The door that he opened every morning and closed every night, and that had been open that Tuesday afternoon when a woman walked in carrying 2 years of silence and a piece of paper with a date on it. He looked at the drawing again. The door was open. Felicia left the drawing on the counter. Gregory did not move it for the rest of the day. The next morning, he framed it. He hung it on the wall beside the door. The first thing anyone would see walking in. A house. A door. Open. Felicia Renee Thompson walked into a tattoo shop carrying 2 years of silence. She walked out, carrying the same grief. But for the first time, it was on the surface instead of underneath everything. Gregory Darnell Sanders said 5 words. You do not have to finish. He did not save her. He did not fix anything. He did not perform a grand gesture. He gave her permission to stop explaining. That was all. Some people will say that was a small thing. That not charging for a tattoo and saying one kind sentence does not make you a hero. That anyone could have done it. That is true. Anyone could have. That is the point. Some people will say that in a world that demands explanations for everything, in a world that asks grieving people to fill out forms and answer questions and tell the story again and again to doctors and counselors and insurance adjusters and co-workers and strangers at the grocery store who notice the sadness in your face and ask, "Are you okay in that world?" The act of not asking is not small. It is the rarest thing. It is a man sitting on a stool in a tattoo shop in Baltimore saying, "You do not have to finish," and meaning it. Both of those are real. Neither one is the question that will stay with you longest. The question is not whether what Gregory did was extraordinary. The question is why it felt extraordinary at all. Why, in a world full of people, the simple act of not demanding an explanation felt like the rarest thing a person could receive. That is not a question about Gregory. That is a question about the rest of us. You have carried dates. Maybe not on your wrist. Maybe in your chest. Maybe in the way you flinch at certain months on the calendar, or go quiet in rooms where someone mentions a name you have not said out loud in a long time. You have been in rooms where someone near you was carrying something so heavy it had changed the way they breathed, and you noticed. And you did not know what to say. You do not have to know what to say. You do not have to have the right words. Sometimes the right words are no words at all. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer another person is not your advice or your sympathy or your story about someone you know who went through something similar. Sometimes it is 5 words. You do not have to finish. That permission is available to everyone. In any room, at any moment. The person sitting across from you right now may be carrying a date they have never said out loud. You do not have to ask them what it means. You just have to let them know that they do not have to tell you. If this stayed with you, share it with someone who is carrying a date. Subscribe to this channel. New stories every week. See you in the next one. This story is fictional. The characters' names and events were created for storytelling and emotional purposes. However, the experiences at the heart of this story, grief loss, the silence that follows the search for ways to carry what cannot be put down, are drawn from real psychological research and the lived experiences of millions of people. I wrote this story because I have watched people I love struggle to explain their pain in rooms that were not designed to hold it. I have sat across from people who were asked to justify their grief before anyone would take it seriously. I have watched them rehearse sentences they should never have had to rehearse. And I have watched what happens when someone just once says, "You do not have to explain." The weight does not go away, but the person carrying it stands a little straighter. That moment is what this story is about. Grief does not follow a straight line. Researchers Margaret Strobe and Henk Schut developed what is known as the dual process model, which describes how grieving people oscillate between confronting their loss and finding ways to continue living. Good days and bad days. Not a road, not a destination. A rhythm. Memorialization tattoos, the practice of inscribing dates or names or final heartbeats onto the body, have become an increasingly studied area in grief psychology. For many people, making loss visible on the skin is a way of moving it from the inside to the outside. Not to forget, to carry differently. In the United States, more than 400,000 children are in the foster care system at any given time. Roughly 20,000 age out each year with no family and no safety net. Gregory's story is fictional. Their reality is not. If you or someone you know is processing grief, you are not alone. The National Alliance for Grieving Children and the Dudgy Center offer resources and support. The door is open.